In today's video, I'm going to show you the new free design resource for July 2024, which is the retro screen action. You can get this effect at studioAAA.com right now for free. I will show it on screen. And if you're new here, I make one free design resource just like this every single month. And yeah, July's resource is this effect, the retro screen action. I've boiled all this down into basically one action, but obviously there is more than one action in this set. And I'll explain that and show that in this video today. To get this type of effect, I'm going to be talking about something known as interpolation, which is like maths or computer science way of saying to guess something with extra steps or to like approximate something. For us in Photoshop, interpolation is what your screen and your computer are doing to display your work in Photoshop and to resize things. Yeah, I'll explain in more detail later, but just to get started, go to studioAAA.com/free and it'll bring you to this page, except there will be something new here for July. I've not created it yet on the site, so it's not here yet, but here or somewhere on the top row you will see retro screen. So go in there and download the free version of that. Of course, the full version, if you have that, you will have more to work with, but today you will not need the full version at all. Nothing I cover in this video will rely on the full version. To be honest, with this effect, the full version is mainly just people who want to get updates on it. So I have an update planned already and that will go out to people who get the full version. But yeah, no pressure at all. You can get by with the free version in this video just fine. Once you download what you need, you will get a zip file and you just need to extract that somewhere on your computer and then locate the ATN file that comes with it. So you can double click an ATN file to install the actions that you need in Photoshop, but you can also go to Window and just make sure Actions is ticked. And then when this little pop-up comes up, you can just go to this menu here and click on Load Actions and then just browse to where you saved the ATN file, and then you'll get these retro screen actions pop up in your menu. Once you've done that, just nest that away somewhere in the Photoshop UI and you can just use it more conveniently from there. Next, you're going to need an image or some kind of project you're working on to run the action on. The way this effect works will vary heavily depending on the size of your image. So I'm going to demo it on more than one file size today. The first one I'm going to show you is 1080 by 1080 at 72 dpi, so like a normal web image basically. And I'm going to pull in this image of this woman with the red lights on her face. This is an image from Pexels by a photographer known as Cotton Bro Studio. I will add a link to the description where you can download this photo if you want to work on it. And I've also got this image from the NASA Hubble Space Telescope thing. If you're interested, you can go to unsplash.com/@NASA. There'll be other websites that host the NASA photos as well. I'm not like sponsored by Unsplash or anything, but yeah, you can download some space photos if you want to do a space photo like I'm going to do as well. But yeah, I'll leave the links in the description to the photos I'm going to mess with today. I'm not here to talk about that though, so I'm going to close that now. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just select my layer and then choose an action. So I'll just explain the names of these actions before we run them. You'll see they're all titled retro screen, and then there's the second part of the title that changes. The default version of this effect is retro screen 100% uniform pattern scale. Now, when it says uniform pattern scale, what I'm referring to there is the pattern is uniform. The pattern that gets set up here uses angles, and I'm using the word uniform because the angles I picked where the title says uniform are 0 degrees, 45 degrees and 90-degree angles. So they obviously add up. They're uniform, they look very structured basically. Uniform was the best word I could think of. That's what uniform pattern means. And then 100% and scale just means that in the little pattern window, which you can customize later on, and this will make sense in a minute, the scale of the pattern is set to 100% of your document size. So yeah, just if that doesn't make sense, it will in a minute, but just wanted to explain that for you. So I'm going to select the space image and I'm going to select the 100% action and then just click play. It'll lag and sort of skip around a little bit while it just generates the effect for you. It'll spit out this layer named retro screen output and it'll ask you to rename it just so you remember to rename it basically. Now, depending on your document size, there might not be like a lot of noticeable change. I don't know if this comes up in the recording very well as a noticeable change, but you'll see that the image now has this texture on it, which appears to sort of increase the contrast. And in some cases, the texture can appear to change the color of your image as well. How the effect looks zoomed out is going to depend on the size of your document and and your image. And the reason for that is what I mentioned before. Interpolation is being used to approximate or just generate like a preview of your image zoomed all the way out. Because if we zoom in now, so I'm going to pick this little star, this little blue star here, and just zoom in on it, and you'll see that actually now, after we've run the action, everything in this image is made up of red, green, blue, or grayscale black to white pixels. Obviously it's not pixel art, but like kind of inspired, kind of a sort of a similar pattern to pixel art. So obviously this is a lot of detail for Photoshop to try and display zoomed out, and so sometimes when you've zoomed all the way out, it will see, like if I zoom out to here, you can't even see the effect. So I'm just explaining this bit to say, don't worry if your effect doesn't look like it's applied until you zoom in. That's normal, and when you save as a JPEG or a PNG or whatever you end up saving as, will apply the effect properly. So if you've ever upscaled or downscaled an image in Photoshop, you might have heard terms like nearest neighbor, bilinear, or bicubic, and these are types of interpolation. I don't know which one Photoshop is using in the actual PSD like viewfinder workspace area to interpolate your image. It's not clear which one they use. For this effect, interpolation is the problem and like how we get to this effect too. So I'm going to explain what that means now by double clicking into this smart object that's been generated. I'm going to double click on retro screen, and you'll see here that there's these 3 pattern layers that have been generated. Now when you run the default version of the action, it is going to create rasterized versions of those patterns. The reason for that is just because I tested this action on an older laptop that I've got somewhere, and sometimes the patterns are too high resolution and it crashes. So that's why these appear when you run the default version. To start editing and customizing, you can hide these layers and then just enable the pattern layers. So just enable the horizontal, RGB, and vertical pattern layers, and then you can double click in and start messing with the scale and the angle of each of these patterns to generate different types of shapes and effects that are going to make up your image, if that makes sense. So you'll see with the way it's currently set up, if we zoom into an area that's quite dark, even like between this green pixel and this blue pixel, there is a red pixel that's just very, very dark, and then this one's a little bit darker, and then this one's darker than that, and then it starts getting brighter again. If you pick an area of your image that maybe only has 1 or 2 colors, like for me, for example, this like star cluster here, when I zoom in, there should not be any red here. It should just be blues and maybe some greens, maybe a little bit like pink and purple. If I zoom in on this star cluster, yeah, you'll see there is a couple of little like pink pixels, purple pixels, but it's mostly blue, green, and black. Whereas if I open up that pattern now and change the angle, you'll see that the output's changed as well. Obviously I just picked a random angle there, so you can edit this as much as you want and like fine tune it. But to fully understand what's actually happening when you do that, you need to understand how interpolation happens when you create a pattern fill in Photoshop. So typically interpolation is the process Photoshop and your computer and your screen uses when the screen space physically available to the window on your computer that Photoshop has to work with is smaller than your actual document size. To simplify that, let's say you have a regular laptop screen which might be 1920 pixels wide and 1080 pixels high, but you open up a Photoshop document at like 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels, or however big, 7000 pixels by 7000 pixels. That means when you're zoomed all the way out and looking at the whole image, your computer now has to work out how it can display your 3000 by 3000 image or whatever you chose with the space it has available to it, which is obviously less pixels than that. To do that, it uses interpolation. We can exploit the fact that Photoshop does that with a pattern fill, and I'm going to show you how right now. I go to File and go to New, and I'm just going to create a new Photoshop document that is 50 pixels wide and 20 pixels high. So it's a tiny document, so I need to zoom all the way in to see what's going on. I'm just going to create a new text layer, got Arial, and I'm just going to write the word hello. Obviously already it looks totally not even legible, so I'm going to have to scale it up. So I'm just going to stretch it to fit the document. So at this point it looks awful, but it is legible. You can tell it says hello. But I'm going to go to edit and I'm going to click on define pattern, and then I'm just going to save it as demo. You don't need to follow this bit, by the way. This is just me. I'm going to explain how interpolation works with patterns using this. So I don't need that anymore. I can exit that without saving. If I go back to my original document that I had open at the start, which is 2160 by 2160, and I go to layer, new fill layer, and click on pattern, Photoshop will load in this default sort of green leaves thing. If I change now to my hello pattern that I just created, and let me see, so if we zoom in, as you can see, it looks stupid. You can see it says hello, the H and the L's are connecting up, and if we browse around, it's always going to say hello. Now the reason for that is because our 50 by 20 or whatever we use document can fit within this 2160 by 2160 pattern at whatever its original size was, however many times Photoshop has got it here. I'm not obviously not going to count all these instances of hello, but you can see, for example, at the bottom it perfectly lines up. There's not like another hello that's being cut off. There's no interpolation going on right now with this texture. It is just displaying it as is. Sorry, I don't mean texture, I mean pattern. If I use those words interchangeably, I'm not doing it deliberately. So now we are going to force Photoshop to interpolate this word into something that looks more like a texture, and we're going to do that by scaling down. So if I scale down to 34%, it's now having to fit that 50 by 20 pixel pattern into a smaller space, and so it's having to simplify the data or the pixels that are there, and as a result the quality is reduced and you start to see some shapes emerging. So if I go lower than 34, let's go to like 25, you can still kind of see there, but only because I know what it says. So if I go down to 12, you can see at this point like it's mostly just gray. You've got these lines that sort of checker and meet up, and it looks like a grid basically. If we then introduce a rotation to it by changing the angle, so if I change this to 45 degrees, at this point it no longer says hello. Obviously it's just like this, almost, it looks kind of dithered, almost like it's really pixely but still sort of sharp in some areas. Like you can see these angular lines that are obviously much lighter than this darker line here, and yeah, it's essentially almost a texture at this point. But the way that it's getting there is by forcing Photoshop to squish this down to 12%, so that whatever interpolation it's using is going to output a different pattern that we can then use with a blend mode to alter and mess with our image. And that's what's happening when you double click into this smart object. Now if I just go and enable just the RGB, and if I pull that out of the layer group and change the blend mode to normal, at 100% with just the angle change, it's going from this pattern here that you can see, which is 4 pixels wide, 1 pixel high, where it's just 50% gray, then a completely red pixel, then a completely green pixel, and then a completely blue pixel. It interpolates and basically has to do some extra steps to guess what that would look like at a 45-degree angle. And the result of that is that some lines are mostly blue, some lines are mostly red, some are mostly green, but there is a new pattern that emerges from the interpolation. So if I change that back to 0, you'll see this is how it should look. If you're going to go through and edit and mess with this to get some cooler effects, and I'm going to show you some cooler effects with this later on in the video, messing with angles and scale is going to allow you to generate just some weird stuff, and then combine that with a blend mode of your choosing, like overlay or soft light or difference, or you know, whatever you want to use to contribute to the overall like retro screen effect that we're going for. So if I put that RGB layer now back in the folder and enable the others, obviously the change that I made there when I changed the angle to -5.12 and the scale to 89%, it washed out a lot of the colors. So now you've got a much more desaturated, still pixely and blocky, but much more desaturated, much more gradual, like less harsh changes in the color. You can see that these red pixels slowly change into blue, rather than before when they probably would have just gone right into blue. So I'll test that now actually. So if we change this back to 100% and then change this to a 45-degree angle, you can see that, yeah, the red it's not as like almost more harsh, that color transition. So yeah, that's how the effect is working. We're also using the overlay blend mode. I've explained overlay in probably a better way than this when I did my video that covered every blend mode, but basically overlay is like lighten blend mode and darken blend mode combined, but sort of split down the middle. So in the areas where the pattern set up in this folder has a lighter pixel than the input image, which is this NASA image that I'm using, will be lightened by the pattern, and areas where the pattern has a darker pixel than the input image, the pattern will be used to darken that pixel. And the way it decides what's light and what's dark is it compares each pixel to 50% gray, which is just this shade that I've loaded up. And yeah, that's basically how the overlay blend mode operates. So you can obviously customize the blend modes and the angle and then even the shape and stuff like that to generate your own presets and your own version for your own image when you're using this effect. But that's the default default that gets outputted. So I'm going to close that now, and I'm going to delete the NASA image, and we're just going to work on this one. So I'm hoping that I can create something that with this image using the eye that I can use in the thumbnail, because I'm always really bad at not making anything for the thumbnail in the video. Earlier in the video, when I told you that the effect relies heavily on not only your document size, but also your image size, I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So I'm right now in a 1080 by 1080 document. So if I double click into this image, you'll see that the image is 4160 by 6240 pixels. So obviously the image is a lot bigger than my document. What I'm going to do is scale my image up so that I'm just going to capture hopefully the eye. Probably need to scale it down a little bit just so I get a bit more of the eyebrow. So my image just shows the eye, but the rest of the data is still there. You can see this outline, and obviously if I move it around, the rest of the data is still there. Let me just center the eye. There's probably about center, but yeah. So that means that now when I run this, one of these effects, it's still got all this image data to work with, but it's like gonna only give me what's happening with the eye. That is like the other way of messing with the scale of this effect. I'm going to show you what I mean by this in a minute. So one of the other effects that comes with the free version of Retro Screen is this Alt Pattern 1. Now for the full version and for updates to the full version, I added and created and messed with more of my own stupid, like some of them cool, some of them weird presets that will go in the full version, but this is just one of those and it's one of my favorites. So if you get something similar set up in your document and then click on the Alt Pattern 1 and just click play to run that, you can see it applying to the full image, and then it's going to ping us back over to our like cropped 1080 version in a minute. It's just loading that in, and this is the type of output you get. Again, zoomed out, like it can look weird because of the interpolation that's happening outside of the pattern, like the interpolation that Photoshop's doing, because we've applied like some high detail patterns to this. So if you then zoom in, you'll see now that my eye, well, it's not my eye, but the eye image I've got is made up now of this pattern. Like it's almost been rebuilt by the pattern. It's not, we're just sort of tricking Photoshop into displaying it like that using the overlay blend mode and the interpolated patterns. I just love this effect. I think it looks so cool and retro, and like it looks like there's some like color errors happening and that kind of thing. So if you zoom in, whether you use this image or whatever you use, just make sure you zoom in to get the realistic version of it. And then to show you what I meant with the rest of the image data still being there, if I double click this now and go in, you will see in this version it looks like nothing happened, because again, Photoshop is using interpolation to guess what this should look like. And because the patterns that we've applied to this image are very high detail, the interpolation or the approximation or the guess Photoshop makes is still arriving at the original. But if you look, if I go File, Save a Copy, and then as soon as you get to the JPEG options dialog box, it is creating like the actual more realistic version. This is still an interpolation because we're zoomed out, but you get to see it a little bit more realistically. And if I save that and just pull that in, I put it outside of that folder and zoom in, you can see the true realistic, like actual rendering of the effect once saved. And then the good thing about the effect, if I go back to working with the live effect now and just delete that demo image, because it's outputting both the pattern file, the pattern layer, sorry, and the rasterized version of the pattern, you can even export these and use them in other projects. Or if you want to just move around this RGB, like you can move that and it'll sort of, the color will be out of phase. So now it's green, I'll phase it back into purple. Or if we move it down and around, you can see the pattern moving. If we move the vertical option, you can see some of the dots in the pattern are moving around, and the horizontal as well sort of take the color out of phase, or it will appear to be out of phase because of interpolation. So this is a weird effect where we're not actually doing, it's not actually an image glitch, but it looks like one because we're using interpolation in the wrong way almost. Hopefully that makes sense. As you start to customize and mess with this effect with different blend modes, different scale factors, different angles, you will see all the different shapes and interpolations and patterns that emerge based on what your input image is and what colors appear in that image. Now, it's worth saying that everything in the full version, so everything that is covered here, the 200%, 150, Alt Pattern 1, Alt Pattern 2, Alt 500, whatever, they are all built from this Retro Screen 100% uniform pattern scale. So if you just get the free version, and you're not going to get the updates, but if you just get the free version, you can still work your way toward these and beyond that and cool stuff. What I'm thinking the update is going to be is something new that you can replace the RGB with that I'm going to create, or that, well, I've already started creating them, but don't know how good they're going to look. But yeah, I really like this effect and I hope you do too. I hope it's useful for you. I think that about covers everything for this effect. I'm just going to try and demo it now. I do quite like it on the eye images. I don't know why, it just looks quite cool with the eye. I found that the only thing this really doesn't work well on is if your input image has a lot of noise. So if you're going to be working on the image beforehand, try not to add noise to it because it will sort of disrupt the pattern and stuff. But yeah, if you look at this one, once I've knocked the red, green, blue texture just out a little bit, you get this like cool pearlescent, almost like holographic effect on the image now. But yeah, as I said, I could sit and mess with this all day, so I'm gonna not do that because it just creates more video for me to edit. If you have followed me a little bit, or if you're just not new to the channel, you will notice that I did not upload anything really in June. So I just took a little bit of a break for some personal reasons, but I am back making videos now. The main video that people have asked me for, a video covering how I created these prints and how I made them holographic and stuff. Unfortunately, the company that I worked with to create those, I asked them to give me, or if they would give me some kind of like affiliate link or code, not even for me to make money, even if I could just do one and put a discount code on there so that if you or someone watching it decided to go and do your own holographic print run, that you could save some money, and it looks like they don't want to do that. So yeah, I'll probably still make the video, but I'm just gonna have to collate some other suppliers on other people who could do it too, or show you how to find a local one. So probably going to make that video soon or next, but let me know if you have any ideas or requests for videos, because that is kind of the hardest thing that I'm finding about putting effort in with YouTube now. This effect will be free for all of July, and if it's popular, if people like it, I will leave it up for free beyond July. We'll see how it goes, see if people like this or not. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. Hope this helped, hope you learned something. Tag me in whatever you make on social media, my links are all below, and I will see you in the next video.